Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Blue Raider Podcast, hosted by Jake Bolden and presented by the Conseco Group General Contracting and Mighty Dog Roofing. Don't miss another Tuesday episode by subscribing to the podcast on all streaming platforms or catch our visual presentation uploaded every week on YouTube. Don't miss our next ticket giveaways by subscribing and following on all Blue Raider Podcast social media accounts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Blue Raider Pod. Welcome back to the Blue Raider Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Bolden, and it is a pleasure to be back in front of you, Raider Nation, as it was a long hiatus, just a month. A few weeks ago, I was with you in Knoxville with Sam Doughton talking over that close loss, in my opinion, to the Tennessee Volunteers, but I'm happy to be back talking more hoops today with some of your favorite GoMiddle analysts. Joining us first is Oliver Baltz and, of course, Connor Nute. Afterwards, to talk about Lady Raiders basketball. Both of us will be talking all about Conference USA basketball, to look ahead for both of these teams, men's and women's. Impressive starts, in my opinion, this first weekend for both programs, but of course we will get into depth in just a minute. But of course, before we get into that, I want to take just a second to thank our sponsors of today's episode, beginning with the Conseco Group. Since 1987, the Conseco Group has been turning dreams into reality. Whether it's pre-construction consulting, construction management, design build, or renovations and improvements, we're here to exceed your expectations. At Conseco Group, we don't just deliver, we deliver with passion, precision, and unparalleled quality. Our hands-on approach ensures your investment is maximized and your vision is brought to life. From Clarksville down to Columbia and beyond, trust the Conseco Group to handle every detail with expertise and care. If you're ready to build your future, contact the Conseco Group today at 615-298-9907 or visit their website at consecogroup.com. And thanks to Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East. When it comes to your home, trust Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East for all of your needs. As a veteran and locally owned business, we're honored to be one of just 11 Owens Corning contractors nationwide to win their prestigious service award. From roofing and gutters to windows and siding, our expert team delivers top quality craftsmanship and unmatched service. We're here to protect your home with pride and precision. Choose Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East, where excellence is a tradition. Call us today at 615-MD-ROOFS. That's MDROOFS. Or visit their website at mightydogroofing.com to schedule your free quote today. Now, it's time to get into our first guest of the episode. That is GoMiddle.com basketball analyst. It is Oliver Baltz. Oliver, how's it going?
It's going great, Jake. Thanks for having me on once again. It's always fun, and happy 2025 to you and yours.
Absolutely. Likewise. We were talking a little pregame here before the episode, a little bit about, your holiday season, the little ones. You first time really taking in Santa Claus this year. I hope everything went well with the family.
Yeah, it was great. I built a Barbie dream house on Christmas Eve. I mean, Santa kind of did, but I'll take the credit for it. It felt like I was building a New York skyscraper of some sort, but it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm blessed. It was awesome just watching them wake up and see the surprise to it. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, the toys are getting bigger and badder. If I could, I mean, I used to be happy with some of the smallest things in the world. Of course, the PlayStation Christmas is one that always comes to mind. So
yeah,
but,
right.
Let's get into it, man. There's so much to unpack. I know we've talked a ton, in our own group messages, also personally to one another about this Conference USA season. We got a little taste of it really this first weekend. I know a lot of people were making the comment that, this conference could go any which way. And I think one thing really, before we get really into what conference weekend was, this is a good conference this year. They're now up to 9th in the KP conference ranking poll between the Atlantic 10 and the American Athletic Conference. Which I think speaks volume to, again, how good this conference has turned themselves into. I feel very reminiscent of that 2021-22 campaign where you had the FAU run to the Final Four, UAB, North Texas in the NIT final, and I'm blanking on the CIT winner, but impressive Conference USA season ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're 100% right, I think about it too. I just feel like it was expected the conference fell off a little bit last year in 2024 when you lose programs like FAU and North Texas and UAB and Charlotte was that CIT winner. I did not see this coming. I did not. I mean, these are some really fine programs with obviously you see what Sam Houston State did last year, and New Mexico State has great history and La Tech's has been a steady, good program the last 10 or so years. Western Kentucky, obviously, has had a ton of history. I did not envision it all coming together like this. Really, really impressive. The league is, I mean, we've talked about it off air. That there could be 8, maybe even all 10 teams that could finish in the top 4, and you wouldn't really be surprised. It's going to be a gauntlet, night in, night out, and we've been really impressed with the Blue Raiders non-conference slate, and it's provided a lot of optimism as far as how good this team can be. And I don't think you have to back off that optimism, but as we start to see how good these teams are on every Thursday and Saturday night, it really makes you realize that this isn't going to be easy. I mean, good thing the Raiders are good because they're going to have to play their best ball to win this league, no doubt.
Yeah, if this last weekend was any indication of that, you go on the road at FIU, and I think a lot of us, myself included, were kind of frustrated with how tough it was to win in Miami against what we would consider the easiest opponent in the conference. That's a game that you should be winning, given if KP matters to anybody, that's a game you should walk in and win. And it was tough. They grounded it out. They won it late, much like they did last season. And credit to them because of what FIU was able to turn around and do on Saturday to who according to ESPN bracketology, is the automatic qualifier out of Conference USA. I mean, FIU took Western to the woodshed. Wasn't even close right out the gate to the first media timeout. So that was, again, that I made the comment that I think you could take 8 of these teams and put them in the top 4. Like, that's just how this conference could unfold. And now with the way FIU has handled Western Kentucky on the road, I'm sure Western's probably got something waiting for FIU at the end of the year back in Bowling Green. But to think that even FIU is in the discussion now, you've kind of opened up this Pandora's box, if you will, that all 10 teams kind of have a road to that first round bye. But to kind of to add on to that first weekend, the FIU win, as I said, gritty, needed it. It's always great to get out to a 1-0 start, especially getting that +1 on the road, as they always say. But then the Liberty game, not necessarily the game that we all thought it would be. I think I anticipated, much like yourself, with the way Liberty had faltered at the end of their loss on Thursday night to Western Kentucky, that the opportunity for them to slip 2 nights in 3 days was very unlikely. And they got out to a sizable lead that first half. I think it grew to as much as 18. The Raiders were able to narrowly, I think they got it to 10, which was the final deficit. I think they might have gotten it to 9 at one point, but the baskets weren't falling. The defense wasn't there like we've typically seen it, especially the 3-point defense wasn't there like we've seen all season long. And Liberty was unfortunately just the better team. And I think that that's kind of been the standard for this conference as far as teams that you have to beat to be a conference champion. They slipped a little bit last year, but they always field a really good team. And this team in particular, returning Zach Cleveland, we saw Colin Porter play particularly well for him. Liberty's just they're a team you're gonna have to beat if you want to win Conference USA.
Yeah, so with Liberty, it's interesting. So last year they had another really good non-conference play last year. It wasn't as impressive as this year, but they ended non-conference play as the 75th national team in Ken Palm. They ended the season as the 131st. So obviously, I think there was some learning curve to playing in. I mean, all due respect to the Atlantic Sun with the Conference USA, even a retooling version that we saw in 2024 is a much more competitive conference than the Atlantic Sun, top to bottom. And to be honest, I kind of expected the same thing to happen again this year. I mean, Liberty obviously really impressive non-conference slate where they only have one loss, go 12-1, and they enter non-conference as the 61st team nationally. I kind of thought it's just kind of be this. They were at least another year away from really conquering that learning curve of Conference USA, if you will. Maybe they still are, and I don't want to overreact to how well they handled Middle Tennessee. They are a really impressive group. I mean, the fact that they shoot so well and they defend they defend shooting so well. The 3-point percentage offensively and defensively, both in the top 15. Effective field goal percentage, which obviously considers 3-point percentage a little bit more in overall field goal percentage, is top 30 nationally on both sides of the ball. So yeah, I mean, it's really tough. It's really interesting to me how they have two non-shooters in Cleveland and Aquino, and they still make up so much of their offense on threes, and I mean they're so efficient with them. So a really good team. Both of those guys are really impressive. They play much bigger than what their height suggests. Obviously, McKay is a great coach with the Tony Bennett descended pack line D's is well known. Just a really tough way to play. The one thing my main takeaway with the Blue Raiders is how much they really missed Kamari Lands this weekend. And I think Lands he's has ups and downs. I don't want to say he's been a disappointment, but I do think we probably expected a little bit more consistent scoring, just general box score stuffing. But his importance was really displayed on Thursday night and Saturday night based on his absence, because Blue Raiders really just don't have anybody else at that power forward position who has that size that Kamari brings, but also has the ball skill that goes with it. Obviously, I think Lands' 3-point percentage is probably better than what it sits at right now. I would be willing to bet that he is on team scouting reports regardless of his 3-point shot or his 3-point percentage so far, and he's taken up a lot of attention, but he also can put the ball on the floor. He makes the right decisions on offense, and he's at least a body on defense. He has his moments, definitely. So the fact that they didn't have him, I think, was a big part of their offensive struggles on this past weekend, and it really just goes to show they need him to really to meet their peak as a team and find a way to win this Conference USA.
And one thing too that I complimented Lance on, especially after the Tennessee game in particular, was his game is transformed. He was a very quick trigger on the perimeter. When he receives the ball now, it seems like he's willing, if he has a lane, to take the lane, give himself an opportunity closer to the rim as opposed to just settling for the 3-point shot. And again, I hate to see that. Maybe I hope it's a lower body injury. That's all that I know. I know that he was chartered out this weekend, which means that he's probably closer to playing than we may think, because they wouldn't fly him out there thinking that he wouldn't play. So I'm optimistic about his return. But as we look forward to this next week, you go to Kennesaw State and Jacksonville State, or excuse me, they come to us. Kennesaw State on Thursday night. Both of these two teams in particular, we talk about maybe the easier part of this Conference USA schedule. I consider this home swing an easier part of the schedule because of Kennesaw State, Jacksonville State being in the bottom third of this conference along with FIU. But one thing, as we've already said, you just can't take these teams lightly. When we talk about Kennesaw State on Thursday night, I consider them a very inconsistent bunch. They have high highs, much like we saw with their home win against Rutgers, who is then ranked in the AP top 25. And as I said, they're 4-0 at home. So, although this game being at home in Murphy Center, obviously it plays to its perks for the Raiders, somewhere where Nick McDevitt has always performed well. I look towards that end of season matchup with Kennesaw State as particularly a tricky one because of how good this team is at home. We haven't seen them play a conference game at home just yet, but you look forward to seeing what that team has to offer. But as far as who Kennesaw State is, they're a two-headed monster. Simeon Cottle and Adrian Woolley, both of those guys averaging 19 and 17 points respectively. Simeon Cottle had himself a game against Jacksonville State on Saturday night. I believe he dropped 28 points on Saturday against Jacksonville State. So definitely a guy that you have to keep your eyes on. In the front court, or excuse me, the back court there, they're very strong. But the backcourt in particular is just a very heavy lineup. The front court is full of rotational players. They don't necessarily have any stalwarts down low, which is where I think we kind of exploit Kennesaw State, especially when it comes to the rebounding perspective of guys like Mostafa, and even Chris Loof is a guy who's kind of increased his aggressive play down low. Torrey Alston is another guy who I look to have a very good game, particularly against Kennesaw State. But you have to step up your backcourt guarding, as I said, to contain Cottle and Woolley. And then Jacksonville State, really, this team went through a lot of transition as far as players in the portal, particularly Kai Tandy, who went to P4. but they have since brought in Wichita State transfer Jaron Pierre, a kid that currently leads Conference USA, but is third in all of college basketball, averaging nearly 23 points per game. Again, identical to the same style that Coach Harper ran with Kai Tandy last year in Jacksonville State, kind of a one-horse offense, if you will. In games where Pierre scores under 21 points, the Gamecocks are 1-5. So I think that's your recipe for defeating the Gamecocks. Now, collectively, when you look at from a numbers standpoint, they take care of the ball. However, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the offense is going to run through Pierre. He is the point guard. So not a lot of passing is going to come from Pierre. He's going to get the ball on the inbounds. If you can have him give the ball up, keep him, deny ball from that point, that's kind of an easier cut and dry. How do you beat him? But I think when it's all said and done, if you can keep the ball out of Pierre, force him to make decisions, don't allow him to shoot the ball, keep that volume low. Again, that's kind of the recipe for winning this one. And again, I think the stretch this week is an easy one, and I think it's a good one to have under your belt as you move into that bigger matchup this week. But this week, what are kind of some things you're expecting to see from the Raiders in this what I quote unquote easier swing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to think about Kennesaw State, man. I mean, obviously that Rutgers win is incredible, but it's basically holding the entire water of their season. And I don't want to downplay a 12-point conference opener against Jacksonville State on Saturday. I mean, it's a enigma of a game when you look at it. Kennesaw State turned it over 21 times, shot worse from three, somehow beat a Big Ten team with two top 5 picks that'll be in the draft in June. They did shoot 20 for 33 from two, which is significantly higher than their season average, which is 49%. If I had to guess, I think they should be the more manageable win. Or I don't want to say win, but the more manageable opponent, clearer path to victory. Jack State, I don't want to say they worry me, but I think the teams that Middle has had more issue with this year. I mean, you look at their 3 losses to teams who I'm not going to consider Tennessee because everybody's lost to them right now. But you have Murray State, Bradley, and Belmont, just 3 teams that well, Belmont and Bradley are both top 50 in effective field goal percentage so far this year, and Liberty too, obviously. And Murray State's kind of fallen off a little bit, but they shot 61% against Middle when they came to the Murphy Center and gave the Blue Raiders their first loss. The fact that Jacksonville State has shot making with Pierre, the incredible score, incredible season he's having, but 2 more guys shooting over 40% from threes. They have shot makers. I guess the one thing that makes me a little more optimistic or a little more settled in the Jacksonville State game is they are 337th in the country in assisted field goals made. So the percent of their field goals made that come off of an assist is relatively low on the national scale. So based on that, you would think it's a lot of my turn, your turn, not cohesive offense like we saw against Bradley and Murray State and Belmont and Liberty. So two teams that I think Middle, it's 2 games they need to win. Jacksonville shot making has me a little bit more focused, is the way I'd put it.
Yeah, and that's well put. And much like basketball is, it's a game of runs, and they're a team that certainly can get hot at any given time. And another team that does so very well is Western Kentucky, who would be that following week. You get a week off from games. You get to practice in preparation for the 100 Miles of Hate. What do you got, Oliver, on the Hilltoppers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a rivalry game. I don't want to cop out, but sometimes rivalry games, it's you just throw everything out. The first game last year was I remember, I don't know the score off the top of my head, but the game in Murfreesboro last year was very low scoring, and then the game in Bowling Green was very high scoring, and then obviously the third game we don't have to talk about that game, but it's definitely a different Hilltopper squad. They don't have that same sort of balance. It's definitely more McHenry hero ball at that moment of time. Not necessarily because he's he's forcing it, but because it's just kind of the way they have to play. They don't have a guy like Newman anymore, who went to Oklahoma State with their coach who just departed. I'm forgetting his name right now. Um, Obviously, they're dealing with injuries in the front court. Babacar Faye don't have much behind him to really uh, adjust down low. So I mean that's kind of a big factor. You know, if they have Babacar Faye, Middle's been pretty strong down low this year with Assam Musafa. I like their chances a lot more if Faye doesn't play, but we'll see. I mean, I think Middle. I like Middle's depth a lot this year. I think if you ignore the Liberty game, but they usually have at least one of those three guards really explode. I think that against Western Kentucky in a game that's high stakes and it's gonna have a lot of fans in the seats, I expect at least one of them to have a really good performance and hopefully carry Blue Raiders to a win.
Yeah, the Toppers are kind of a head scratcher. They're dealing with, like as you mentioned, the injury there to Babacar, and then Christian Lander's a guy who's receiving some limited minutes, a 3-point threat that he is. But the recipe for FIU was the rebounding. I think the margin was 14 out rebounds, even with a injured Chandler Brewer that didn't play against the Raiders on Thursday night. So, but yeah, when you go back to the whole rivalry of it all, anything could certainly happen in a game like that. Just all about who gets hot, and that's what MTSU experienced late in the season at home against Western Kentucky, a team who, as we saw in the conference tournament, as you alluded to, is better than MTSU, but when you come in and you have enough spirit ahead of you, I think the Raiders were on a 4 or 5 game win streak going into that game. It certainly gives you the spirit that anything is possible. And so hopefully you get some wins under your belt this week. You move ahead to that one. And then if you're able to steal that one, you go back on the road. And they are on the road. Make sure I get it correct. I believe they're on the road to Sam Houston and Louisiana Tech. Now, this swing in particular, when you're looking at it at the beginning of the season, you're thinking you're going 1-2. You're playing the preseason favorite in Louisiana Tech, and you're playing the defending regular season champions in Sam Houston State. Louisiana Tech looks, to say the least, extremely beatable, as we saw this last week. But I don't want to take anything away from UTEP and New Mexico State, as you'll talk about here in just a little bit, because those two teams, again, impressive. It just talks to the depth of Conference USA, and forgive me for constantly repeating that in this episode. But Louisiana Tech, again, 30-point loss on Saturday at Las Cruces, New Mexico State. There was a lot going on within that game in particular. They just announced their new AD, had I'm sure some sort of record crowd for this season. So they showed out. But Louisiana Tech, non-conference record 11-2. They had a home win against bracketology Grand Canyon, 13 seed out of the WAC, which is an impressive win. They only had one game outside of quad 3 and 4, which was Memphis, and that was a 10-point road loss in Memphis. So this does start the outcome of this last week does start to question, did Louisiana Tech play a tough enough non-conference schedule to really equate to the preseason hype that they experienced, because they only had 2 games outside the top 200, and that was the Grand Canyon game and the Memphis game, and they went 1-1 in those games. So as we saw, Daniel Bacho, he's kind of the man. 18 points per game, and a massive 75% field goal shooting percentage, which is incredible even for a center. And his rebounds surprisingly are down to 6.5 per game for a guy his size. But much like we saw with UTEP, a team that just turns over the ball, they turn teams over a lot. If you're able to deny Bacho the ball, force someone like Sean Newman to beat you, who, again, a guy that's 9.5 points per game, 9.5 assists per game, which is good enough for second in all of college basketball. So he's the threat in and of himself. But they have so many weapons, Louisiana Tech does. And I guess UTEP's defense in particular is very stymied, that just created a lot of issues for them that they couldn't get ironed out in enough time, and that game got out of hand. And then Sam Houston, another team that I will be the first to say I have always been skeptical of Sam Houston State. Going back to last year, if you listen to the show enough, I've always considered them frauds. And this year, if it's any indication, we're kind of seeing that. 0-4 in quad 1 and 2. They lost both of their games this last weekend as well. I don't have any belief system in who they are. Despite, again, I'm giving credit to UTEP and New Mexico State. They had a better game against New Mexico State. But Lamar Wilkerson's our guy, nearly 19 points per game. He's an excellent triple threat as far as a 3-level scorer. At 44% 3-point field goal shooting. Marcus Boykins, another guy who's kind of has come up for them this year at 9 points per game. And he is coming off of an injury that I have labeled here in December. I think he just came back to full force this last weekend. In particular, though, this team shoots the ball from three really well. And they have a good adjusted offensive efficiency, but they're down low in the front court. They're very thin. They don't rebound particularly well. And like I said, if you're able to, and I've been saying this forever, if you're able to contain Wilkerson, this team is very average at best. I would consider this team in the bottom third, and we may end up seeing that. I know I'm harsh on them, but I just think they're the worst ever regular season champions Conference USA has ever had. And UTEP upsetting them in the conference tournament last year was an indication of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you are right. You have always been the Sam Houston skeptic, and you deserve your props. It's been like that this year. I mean, they had an impressive season last year, but I do think it's almost like Wilkerson came back and everybody just thought we're just going to run it back and it's going to be the same situation. And no two teams are the same, even if the personnel is identical. And I don't, their personnel isn't identical. So that might be a bad way of putting it. But I mean, they're great offensively and terrible defensively. And you have to have balance. I mean, we've seen that as Blue Raider fans. It's, even when the Raiders were good defensively, if they can't score, then you can't win. Sam Houston State, to their defense, I guess they played a really tough schedule. I mean, they played Baylor, Pittsburgh, Indiana. They didn't hold a candle to any of them, though. Just because Middle Tennessee led the Volunteers at halftime, I don't want to make it seem like, that's the automatic proof of them being legit and the Bearcats not being legit. But I do think it says a lot. I mean, they're still waiting for a top 200 win so far. So I agree. I'm not all the way out on them, but I'm definitely hovering over the fraudulent button. I don't want to go that far, but I guess I will. With La Tech, I think it's interesting with them. I think you can put it a couple ways. So, yes, I do think part of their issue was they hadn't played a game since December 21st. And then they obviously went and played at UTEP and at New Mexico. And this time of year can always be a little funky for teams, just having that long break, going back home, missing practice time. You're just out of the routine. And then especially the way the Conference USA – it's almost like one of those early season MTEs, holiday tournaments, where you play one game right after another, and there's not really much you can regroup and reset and just completely fix overnight because you have a game the next day. And in this situation, you do have one off day, but I think that's kind of part of their bad weekend. I mean, 40 points over 2 games is really, really bad. I'm not buying all the way into it, but I do think it's safe to say that they should not be the conference favorites like they were voted for in the preseason. Main issue I have with La Tech is they turn the ball over and they don't force turnovers. They're bottom 50 in both offensive and defensive turnover percentage. And then their rebounding's dropped off a lot since last year as well. Their bottom, 150, you could call it, in offensive rebounding percentage and defensive rebounding percentage. Last year, they were top 10 in defensive effective field goal percentage. They're not there. They just don't have that same identity. I think, Crawford, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he's playing in the G League. He might have even gotten a cup of coffee in the NBA. He's a big loss, and Bacho's a great player, but I don't really think they just bounce back and replaced Crawford. I mean, he's a hard player to replace. So I'm not all the way concerned with La Tech, but their flaws are pretty clear, no doubt.
Yeah, I always said that who is Bacho with Crawford being gone, and that's something I previewed over on our Conference USA Roundtable episode. Was who is he going to be without Crawford? Because obviously Crawford's going to draw a lot of attention, and now Bacho is drawing that same attention and doesn't necessarily have that same relief in the front court. But keep things rolling here. The last series, at least of teams that we wouldn't be facing, would be New Mexico State, and then of course the UTEP trip. And gosh, again, both these teams have really been the surprise of Conference USA, especially in this first weekend, given the wins over Sam Houston and La Tech for both of these teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, New Mexico State's impressive. They have their top 7 players are juniors or seniors. I think only one of those players is actually a junior. So very, very old team. Jason Hooten is a good coach. Obviously, he came from Sam Houston a couple of years ago. I mean, their season has been interesting so far too. I mean, 3 of their losses to Dayton, to Texas, and to UNLV, those aren't bad losses by any means. And they have 3 more losses to Pepperdine, Bowling Green. But Pepperdine, Bowling Green was one of those holiday tournaments. Like I said, you can't just turn around and practice and work out your kinks in the middle of those holiday tournaments. I mean, we saw it with Connecticut. I mean, when it rains, it pours. And I don't think Connecticut's lost a game since that Maui debacle they had where they lost 3 straight. I mean, they don't look like 24 and 23 Connecticut, but they still look like they will contend for the Big East. But yeah, I mean, New Mexico State, we'll see. They're strong defensively, top 75 in the country there. As far as a field goal percentage defense, we'll see. I think with the way their schedule looks, lost to their good teams, beat most of the bad teams. But yeah, I mean, the way they handled Sam Houston, Louisiana Tech to start the year it's pretty impressive. UTEP, I'm there with UTEP. Their statistical profile is very, very impressive. Second in the country in turnover percentage. I mean, that is their identity, and that's such a huge part of basketball. I don't really think, or at least college basketball, that I think is overlooked is having an identity, knowing what you are. And UTEP, I mean, so this is their 3rd straight year, or would be their 3rd straight year, finishing in the top 16 of defensive turnover percentage. Obviously, that's Joe Golding's calling card. However, what's different this year is they are 22nd in 3-point percentage. They were sub 300 the past 2 years. So that is quite a improvement. And I mean, we are at the point where we're 2 months in. It's not a small sample size anymore. This is a good shooting team. So if they can force turnovers and if they can hit 3-point shots, and 3-point shooting can be a little volatile. So I don't expect them to be the surest, soundest, most consistent group, but a really, really impressive identity for the Miners. And I do like what they're seeing. I do expect them to be one of the most impressive teams in Conference USA this year.
They are definitely the sneaky pick, in my opinion, for Conference USA regular season champions, just because of how well their defense travels. We saw it, for an example, when they played here in Murfreesboro last year. I remember the eye rolling of, I think it was 20 first half turnovers that they forced against Nick McDevitt in the Murphy Center. That's just something that, as you said, Joe Golding has a knack for getting his guys to do. And he had a lot of turnover this year. And a lot of us wondered, what would this team be with all that turnover? But you kept guys like Otis Frazier III, who, in my opinion, is one of the most unsung heroes of Conference USA, particularly for the Miners. He's a kind of player that you can take from UTEP, put him on any team, and he's going to contribute 10 and 6 every single night. He's just that type of guy. Ahmed Bynum, the DePaul transfer, is a big part of that 3-point shooting prowess you're talking about. The 56% 3-point shooter with the volume there to kind of back up that number, averaging nearly 11 points per game. That team is just sneaky good. I think, as you said, as volatile as the 3-point shooting is, if that defense continues as I expect it to, if the 3-point shooting stays hot, they're going to be a tough team to beat when it comes to March. And they just kind of have that ability. And Joe Golding, great coach. I think he's got his feet underneath him. I think he's going into year 4 at UTEP. Even with all the turnover, he seems to have the right guy, the wits about him, and the guys to kind of back up his coaching style. So That's the rundown, really, of Conference USA. We try to apply all of this to MTSU in particular, I want to look back at that schedule. What's the stretch in your mind, Oliver, that this team needs to, I guess, mentally be prepared to kind of get through if we want to see ourselves a top. I say the top four, but I still think this team could vie for a regular season championship.
Yeah, I mean, when it's this good, it's hard. It's hard just to say one stretch, but I'll say. I mean, I hate to say this, and then I don't want to overlook this week, like I'm part of the team, and me overlooking them is going to have anything to do with their performance. But so once they, assuming that they can take care of business and win games that they're favored against Kennesaw State and Jacksonville State, I think they'll have a week off, obviously, then play Western Kentucky, travel to Sam Houston, Louisiana Tech, then host New Mexico State and UTEP. That seems like, I mean, at that point, once that stretch ends, you're halfway done, or at least close to halfway done with the conference season. You'll have a lot better of idea what this team is, what their potential is as far as finishing in the conference. That's sort of what I have circled.
Yeah, for me personally, it's that end of year. If you're still vying for a regular season championship, and gosh, like you could point at any point, the season could just be over. But I know that this conference in general is going to beat themselves up. I said that the conference champion more than likely is going to win 13 at most games, because that's how tough it's going to be on the road. And for those that don't know, that's only 4 road wins. You need 4 road wins, in my opinion, to win Conference USA. Well, you picked one up in Miami, so you've got to pick up 3 more somewhere else. I think your best opportunity to pick up 2 more is Jacksonville State and Kennesaw State. You've got to find one somewhere else. That could be Sam Houston. That could be UTEP, New Mexico State swing. I think Louisiana Tech and Western are going to be tough as is, but you got to find one somewhere. And I think if you have an opportunity to really get some momentum towards the end of the season, that early February stretch where you're on the road in Jacksonville, Kennesaw State, week-long break before you go to Bowling Green, that could be an area where this team could catch some heat. You come back home, play Louisiana Tech, Sam Houston State. That's the stretch in particular that I have pinpointed as if this team is going to make a run for the conference championship, that's going to be the most important. But you got to do what's in front of you, much like Kennesaw State, Jacksonville State this weekend. I look forward to it. Oliver, I know you'll be following closely along all season long, a lot of your stuff over there at GoMiddle.com. Just wrote a piece on J-Rock Counter. I know you've got some more stuff in the works. Anything in particular to tease for us?
No, I think what kind of I mentioned that once they I think it's February 1st. That is that halfway mark once they play UTEP at home. I'll probably put something together then, sort of a just a temperature check on the season or the conference season, what's going right, what's going wrong, how they can fix or how they can continue and stay great. That's kind of what I have my eyes on next. I just put together a snippet on Twitter of everybody's collective rank, averaging it out kind of on Ken Palm and Torvik and the net ranking, and then just trying to organize and just put together comprehensive data for everybody to see, just to gauge where everybody's at, who's good at what and who needs to improve at what. So yeah, just always grinding. But I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. I'm lucky to get to cover the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders, no doubt.
And let's be honest, it's a fun team to cover. You know, we've had our down years, and this is a really fun team to cover. So if you're not already, make sure you're following Oliver, especially on Twitter /X at GoMiddle Oliver, for all of those breakdowns. Of course, as the season goes on, I know you live tweet a little bit as well. But Oliver, I appreciate you taking the time to talk some hoops with us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yep, looking forward to it, Jake. Thank you.
Did you know the Blue Raider podcast has an online store? You can now support your favorite podcast by checking out our selection at our website, blueraiderpodcast.com. And stay tuned for new merchandise releases as we collaborate with athletes in NIL partnerships.
Joining the Blue Raider podcast again, returning is a GoMiddle basketball analyst, talking today especially about the Lady Raiders basketball. It is Connor Nute. Connor, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent, man. Did you have yourself a good holiday season?
I did, man. It was It was relaxing. I miss being on campus and being in the borough, but it'll be good to get back. Haven't strayed away from any Blue Raider basketball, though, that's for sure.
Well, tell us a little bit too. I know last time we I was talking before the show, we rushed in, not much of an icebreaker for those that don't know you. Obviously, you're a student at MTSU. You are helping us out at GoMiddle when it comes to recruiting. I've kind of deemed you the Lady Raiders basketball analyst for us, but we know you do men's basketball as well. What are kind of some things you're going to school for? Tell us a little bit about who Connor Nute is and what his objectives are.
Sure, yeah. Like you said, I'm a junior at MTSU right now. I'm helping with GoMiddle, cover men's and women's. You've kind of deemed me as the women's guy around here, but I do both. I'm currently working as a host and producer over at 102.5 The Game in Nashville, where we carry the Predators, and I have the Saturday show 9 to 11 for his company. Listen, if you haven't, it's a great time. But yeah, I mean, I'm a basketball junkie. Oliver Baltz, who I think was on here earlier, has called me a nerd about it, but I will take that heavily. I love that.
Well, here at Blue Raider Nation, we don't want to take things a little bit too far, but we have to let them know that you are at heart a Kentucky Wildcat fan.
Yeah, I could pull out the basketball right now, but I don't feel like getting up. So.
Well, this is my opportunity, and I know you might roll your eyes at me, but what MTSU 1-0 all time against the Cats in men's basketball.
Yeah.
Lady Raiders, not so much, but they do have a recent win over the Lady Cats for that matter. But let's turn our attention over to Lady Raiders, shall we? About this impressive start to Conference USA season. I know going into this season, all the talk was about MTSU and Liberty. There's a lot of backstory. There's a lot of trash talk going on. This last week at the press conference on Saturday, Rick Insell kind of shied away from feeding into any of that trash talk, and rightfully so. I think what they did on the court was telling enough about what this team was capable of. To be honest, I thought we might get a close matchup, but much like last season here in Murfreesboro, the Lady Raiders just kind of ran away with it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a testament to Liberty's strength of schedule and team buildup as a whole, right? Looking at their non-conference, they went 5-4. Number 128 in the net. Not great. Their best win, a neutral W over 144 Arkansas. Not great at all. 0-4 in quad 1 and quad 2. So, I mean, I think we kind of went into this game expecting the Lady Raiders, with the team they have compared to the Liberty Flames team, kind of just run away with it, right? I think that's exactly what they did. They lived up to expectations, and it was a good game. It was a good weekend for the Lady Raiders.
Rightfully so. Yeah, the Liberty game had its own kind of storyline behind it. You know, the Bella Smuda action with Anastasia Boldareva. They did a great job holding Smuda, the leading scorer for the Lady Frames, to just 7 points, which is miraculous as is. Really frustrated her, which, again, as a Lady Raider fan, I'm kind of happy to see that they were able to frustrate him and frustrate the Lady Flames as a whole. As we talk about the other opponent that they faced on Thursday night that we kind of gloss over is FIU, a team that surprised Conference USA last season with the way they finished in the top 3, and really came out to a slow start this year, 3-7 in the non-conference, the lowest net rating currently in Conference USA. I do think things will turn around a little bit for them. They're dealing with some injuries, as we saw this last Thursday night, and they're obviously very capable of winning games, because on Saturday they turned around and went on the road to Bowling Green and beat the Lady Toppers 80-79 in a really close barn-burning game. And again, kind of showed how good the Lady Raiders team is. If we can bring it back to MTSU, they scored 80 points against Western Kentucky. MTSU held them to 39, I believe, was the final on Thursday night. I mean, it just speaks volumes to, one, FIU is not as bad as maybe we think they are. They're just trying to get their feet underneath themselves, have some injuries to deal with. But gosh, when you hold a team that's number 3 in the conference and scoring to 39 points, again, you kind of put MTSU in their own league of play, if you will.
Sure. And it was a complete team effort looking at the box score. I mean, Anastasia Boldareva, who's been probably the player I've been most impressed with all season, had a double-double with 12 and 10. Courtney Blakely only scored 7 points, but she's dishing out 10 assists. So if you can space the floor like that and kind of work through the posts like Anastasia Boldareva does, but also with the pure playmaking ability you have in Courtney Blakely, that's a recipe for disaster. That's how teams win. When you have elite guard play and elite post play like the Blue Raiders had this weekend, it's a recipe for disaster. And I think teams in Conference USA heading into conference play now I think that's something you need to be afraid of and be looking at.
Absolutely. And one of the areas too that I think as we transition our talk into this upcoming weekend's matchups, you go down to Kennesaw State on Thursday, and then you wrap up in Jacksonville, Alabama on Saturday against Jacksonville State. You haven't quite faced a purely defensive team like we will see this weekend. You talk about Jacksonville State, the number 2 scoring defense behind the Lady Raiders, and Kennesaw State closely behind as the number 3 in Conference USA. Those teams in particular, I don't know that they necessarily scare me. I would put them in the bottom half as you look at their net ratings. Kennesaw State there is at 233. Jacksonville State is at 181. So they are quintessentially the bottom of Conference USA, along with FIU and Sam Houston State. But you're the one area that has always been a mark against the Lady Raiders has been the offense. As we've seen when they play these larger matchups, like the Kansas State game in particular, like Princeton we saw there at the end of 2024, they struggle against those good defensive teams. I don't think that this is necessarily that these are not those teams that are going to do that. However, we have seen in years past that the Lady Raiders have slipped up, in particularly on the road in games very similar to this. Like we saw the Sam Houston swing 2 years, or excuse me, this Texas San Antonio swing 2 years ago, the UTEP swing 2 years ago. When you run into these teams that play good defense on the road, that seems to be our weak spot this year is the offense. When they're able to shut down Courtney Blakely, as you say, hold off the assist, they're doubling Boldareva, getting her into these turnover situations where she's putting the ball on the floor. That's where things kind of get a little hairy for us. But I don't think I think that this team is just so strong. I mean, gosh, what we saw this week, I kind of has eliminated any doubt that this team is capable of going 18-0 again. And to draw it back to the Kennesaw State game that's coming up this Thursday, they're going to face what I would consider a player of the year candidate if you took anyone outside of MTSU and Bella Smuda for that fact. Princess Harden has been great. She was a Conference USA player of the week this last week. She's been averaging 16.5 points per game, 10 rebounds per game. So she's averaging a double-double. But one thing that we've seen, especially with this Lady Raiders team, is their ability to shut down the opposition star player. So I think that's kind of the recipe for winning, specifically the Kennesaw State game, where a girl like Princess Harding could take over, shut her down. They're a very weak offensive scoring team when you remove Harden from the floor. So I think that's the recipe there. But let's go ahead and move that attention over to the week thereafter. They have a little bit of a week of break, or I would say that's a Coach Insel, but he said they're not taking a break. They're taking a break from games. But the big
As
one
he should.
Right. And a big one, as we always anticipate, no matter how good or bad these two teams are, they play with Western Kentucky, the 100 miles of hate. And I mean, that's a game that, again, you're always worried about what could happen in those rivalry games.
Sure. It's a rivalry game, but looking at Western Kentucky and the season they've had and the things they put out there on that box score, they're a very beatable team. They went 7-3 in the non-conference, which is solid, but they ranked 161 in the net. Their best win was a road win against number 121, Abilene Christian. Only played 2 games outside of Quad 4. So kind of a weak schedule for the Lady Toppers. They ranked first in scoring, 76.1 points per game in Conference USA. That's 44% field goal shooting. That's 4th in Conference USA. So they can score the ball when they're open. They do a great job of spacing the floor. They have 4 players that average double figures. Alexis Mead with 14.3, Destiny Salary 13.1, Hayes with 12.7, and Josie Givlin with 10.4. And they're first in Conference USA turnover margin. So they're an offensive team. They're a good defensive-minded team too. But here's the thing. They play a short lineup. 6 players average 20 minutes plus per game. Short rotation. Not much bench depth. They're the worst scoring defense in Conference USA in field goal defense. So they're very easy to score on, it looks. And they're 9th in rebounding. That to me tells me that Anastasia Boldareva is going to absolutely cook in the post. She's just going to grab every single ball that comes to her because she's bigger and she knows how to grab a rebound. I don't know. I don't know what you think, Jake, but reading that off and watching some of the Lady Toppers this year, I think obviously it's a rivalry game, so you never know what could happen. That's a very beatable team to me.
Right, and they were one of the few teams this week that went 0-2 at home. So you've kind of put them on notice as far as how good is this team really. And you touched on it, 7-3 in the non-conference. That's a good record, but the scheduling was rather weak for them, and they kind of got. I want to say they started the season 6-0, 7-0. They kind of put Conference USA on notice. But again, when you reflect back on who they played, they dropped a Liberty game, which is tough, but you're still home court advantage. And then FIU, who 2 nights ago lost at MTSU by 31. And you were trailing almost the entirety of that game to that FIU team that lost by 31 points. So definitely, as you said, well put. I mean, they have a balanced scoring attack, but that's kind of it. But we've been told at MTSU that that's always a problem. So I'm sure that they might be a recipe for them that they think works. But yeah, I couldn't agree more that I think that this is a game that should be winnable, but rivalry games always leave a little bit of mystery in the air, if you will. But the next series after that, they will be back home where they'll face Sam Houston and Louisiana Tech. And as I've already touched on, Sam Houston being in the bottom of the conference, much like they were last year. I want to say they finished 9th in the Conference USA. They're more than likely to finish bottom 10th if I had to guess right now. There's just not very many redeeming factors with this team. They have so many new transfers. Kayla Kelly, one of those included, that is averaging 14 points per game, but that's about it in the double digits as far as scoring threats for them. They do rebound the ball very well. They are very good in the turnover margin area, but collectively, they're just not a team that I would consider a threat. Louisiana Tech is interesting. Currently in the net at 179. They went 0-3 in quad 1s and 2s, so don't have any big wins, and really none of them were necessarily relatively close. But this is a team that returned a lot of their top talent. You have Robin Lee back, who's averaging almost 13 points per game. She's 4th in the conference in shooting percentage. Gianna Morris at 11 points per game. But Jordan Marshall has kind of been an intriguing addition for them. I want to say she's a 6-foot guard, kind of a 3-4 power forward, small forward, however you want to really look at him nowadays. But she's averaging 12.5 points per game and nearly 9 rebounds per game as a freshman. I've been really impressed with her game. She's kind of an X factor for Louisiana Tech, who a team that I didn't necessarily have on my radar as being as good as they have been playing thus far. I mean, they went 2-0 in the first weekend, albeit home games against relatively easy opponents. But that is something that I have my eye on as, again, maybe not the home game against Louisiana Tech, but the road game in particular. And we saw last year early in the season against the Lady Dogs, they go by the Lady Texters. We went to overtime with the Lady Texters. So that's always a tough arena to play. They have a rich history of women's basketball. So you can always promise that Louisiana Tech is going to have a tough team. And I fully anticipate later in the year that could be a game that you kind of pin as like, you've got to survive this weekend if you want to be 18-0. And again, I still think there's a possibility of getting the automatic qualifier. So you got to win these. You have to win these games, especially at home, but definitely on the road. But the week thereafter, Connor, you'll wrap us up here with as far as the opponents that they face, the road swing that is typically pretty tough, not just for the fact of the opponent, but because you're going all the way across the country. They got the New Mexico State and the UTEP trip.
Sure, yeah. Looking at UTEP, that's the game that's concerning more to me. 5-4 in non-conference, which isn't great. And those 4 losses were all in quadrant 3, but their best road win was against number 165 Texas A&M Corpus Christi. But to me, they have an X-factor shooter, and that's Ivani Tensai, who averages 13.5 points per game, leading Conference USA in 3-point field goal percentage at 44%. That is someone you cannot leave open. If you leave her open, chances are she's probably going to burn you. Now, last year, MTSU held her to just 5 points. They need to do that again. Do not let her get hot. Do not let her get hot at all. They have a couple of other hot players. Portia Adams averaging 10.4 points per game. Zeta Delma is 2nd in Conference USA in assists. She averages 4.5 assists per game and a 1-to-5 assist to turnover ratio. She's a ball handler. she is someone that controls that offense, similar to what MTSU has in Courtney Blakely. But assists, you can limit those. Play defense, and you should be just fine. Now, the good thing about UTEP is they're 9th in their scoring offense, and their team is middle ground throughout Conference USA. But that's a sneaky team to me. That's a team that could creep up on you and take you down if you underestimate them.
Yeah, absolutely. UTEP in particular, as you said, when you go there to El Paso, it's a tough place to play. They always bring a crowd, no matter how good or bad their basketball team is. But the ninth in scoring offense has never necessarily been a bright spot for UTEP. But again, they get in these rock fights at home games, much like we saw last season. Very low scoring game. It came down to the wire. So I expect a good matchup in El Paso. Then in Las Cruces, New Mexico State, they've got a star of their own.
Yeah, Molly Kaiser averaging 20.4 points per game. That's 15 in women's college basketball. 15th in the entire nation. Shooting 51% from field goal, 105 free throw attempts, excuse me. She lives on the line, 8th in college basketball right now. She's essentially their Savannah Wheeler. Basically what we had last year in Savannah Wheeler. She shoots 44% from the field. That's 3rd in Conference USA. But she is exactly that entire team. She keeps that team moving. They have undersized bigs. Last year, Fanta Gasma, she averages 10 points per game, but Boldareva had her a double-double on her last year. That's just, they're undersized. That doesn't bode well for them, especially with the post size that MTSU has and the strong bigs. That's another trap team if you let Molly Kaiser go crazy, but a very winnable game if you win it through the post.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the Savannah Wheeler comparison is spot on because that literally is just about the stat line that Savannah Wheeler had. I know that Molly's probably scoring a few more points per game than Savannah did, but the one thing that was different about Savannah in relative to MTSU, where Kaiser is for New Mexico State, is that we had other options. And as you said, outside of Kaiser, they don't have very many options. But she has been a threat once you're able to shut her game down. I think one of the other things that I'd noted myself was that if she was under, I think it was 16 points, they hadn't won a game. So if you're able to limit her scoring, New Mexico State is kind of a one-trick pony, if you will. So, but that's still an interesting road swing because, again, you're going all the way across the country just about to El Paso and Las Cruces. Things can get interesting, get dicey there. But as we draw that collectively, that's a tough schedule as is. If we go back to the teams that we talked about at the top of the episode with Liberty and FIU to kind of round out your schedule because you end the season at Liberty on a Thursday and then you go to Miami on that final Saturday against FIU. When we draw to the season's conclusion, what do you kind of see as far as the team going 18-0? What do they have to continue to improve upon? And is 18-0 still really a feasible? Is it feasible for this team to get to at the end of this season?
Sure. I think it's definitely a possibility to see this team go undefeated in Conference USA. I like the way Tamia Scott is playing right now, obviously averaging 15, 6, and close to 2 assists per game, but she kind of controls the pace of that team, it feels. She is a true guard. Like I said, Anastasia Boldareva is the player that has impressed me most. I say this about Isam Mustafa over on the men's side, but she reminds me of a female Oscar Tshiebwe, to put it in Kentucky terms. She's going to get a board no matter what. She's going to fight for it, and she wins post matchups. She dominates the post. So I think in order to continue that success, you keep playing to your players' strengths. You keep letting Tamia Scott go off and score. You keep letting Courtney Blakely find the open man and make the shot. You keep feeding Boldareva in the post, letting her cook down there, and let her grab the rebounds and control your own pace. This team controls their own destiny, I feel. I think there is not a team in Conference USA that I could look at and say, oh, that team is better on paper, a matchup perspective. I think it's a very real possibility that this team can go 18-0 and maybe even host in March Madness. We'll see. But I think 18-0 in conference play is not out of the question here.
Yeah, the games that I have pin marked as potential losses is the at Louisiana Tech game there. They believe it's in late February, and then you have the Liberty in your final week. So those are the two that I have my eye on. But yeah, your breakdown there is spot on. Jalen Gregory is another player that I think is a big X factor for this team because when she's not scoring the basketball, she's playing very sound defense. She normally gets tasked with guarding the other team's Molly Kaisers, Princess Harden potentially. She's a little tall, but Jalen Gregory is definitely up for the task. And like you said, as far as the rebounding goes, it's tough to beat this team when you're not getting second chance opportunities. And you have Alina Enrique, You've got Boulder down there. We've seen Grantham get some minutes. He's obviously a hard-nosed rebounder. That's kind of her one main objective when she's on the floor for us. So I'm excited about that. And then, of course, you got Savannah Davis, Jada Harrison, who've been getting some uptick in minutes lately. I'm excited to see their progression as guards as we look to the future, as we see a future of the Lady Raiders without Jalen Gregory, without Courtney Blakely, pending maybe a fifth year of eligibility that's looming over the NCAA right now. But we'll see where all those things go. But Connor, it's been a pleasure for you to join us today. One thing, I know we talked a lot of Lady Raiders basketball here, but I want to give you a few minutes here on the men's side of things. As far as the men's basketball season goes, you kind of have an idea of where you think they finish in Conference USA?
Oh, that's such a tough question because Conference USA is deep this year. It's a battleground. I think you said this the other day over text. There's not a team in Conference USA I can look at and say that team doesn't deserve to be top 4 in this conference, because every team has its own things. But I've been very impressed with Nick McDevitt this year. The guard play has been phenomenal with Justin Porter. Issam Mustafa, if you haven't learned anything about me by now through this interview, I mean, I'm a sucker for post play. Issam Mustafa has been absolutely electric. A great ad this year. And they've got some young pieces to build off in the future. So I think Blue Raider basketball is headed in the right direction on both ends, men's and women's. But as far as where the men's team finishes in the conference, I could absolutely see them getting a top 4 seed. I think that is absolutely a possibility.
Absolutely, and that starts again that this weekend. They've got the Kennesaw State, Jacksonville State, and of course the big one with the 100 Miles of Hate coming up in 2 weeks. So to preview next week's episode, we will be joined by the tennis head coach Jimmy Borendane to talk a little bit about the Raiders season and their quest for a six-peat in Conference USA champions, as well as a preview of the 100 Miles of Hate with your very own Stephen Moffitt of the 100 Miles of Hate, Stephen Moffitt of the Topper Talk podcast to preview that upcoming matchup. I appreciate again our guest today, Connor Nute. Of course, at the beginning of the episode, Oliver Baltz, talk all things basketball. Look forward to seeing all of your stuff over there at GoMiddle.com. So if you're not already doing so, make sure that you are subscribed to get that premium content, of course, and to follow even the free boards that are over there. So make sure you have an account so you're not missing those conversation pieces. To plug Connor, it's C_Nute15, right? At Twitter, X, and Instagram.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, of course, if you're not already following the podcast at Blue Raider Pod on all of your social media, Instagram, Twitter, X, YouTube, TikTok, of course, to catch everything. Of course, future giveaways. Baseball season's right around the corner. We'll be doing a season ticket giveaway. So if you're not already following, make sure you do so you don't miss when that comes out. So, of course, I appreciate everyone for tuning in to today's episode. And until next time, go Blue.